I'm delighted to introduce David Flynn. And because I was curious to find out some more about David, I had a look at his LinkedIn profile and saw that just a few days ago, in fact it was probably a week ago, David was a panellist at the UK Construction Week, talking about embracing digitalisation in construction. And as we've heard again and again, it is a global issue, so it's really wonderful to have David here talking about that today. David is qualified as an architectural technologist in Dublin at the Institute of Technology. He also founded DesignTech, a computational BIM consultancy based in London. He's previously led BIM efforts at Grimshaw Architects, where he spent many visits to Melbourne and probably knows some of the good coffee spots around, KPF and ALA. He's got a drive to build advanced digital solutions, particularly focused on prefabrication and offsite construction. David leverages computational and generative design principles to eradicate those wasteful processes still inherent in the design and construction industries. Again, you see that theme of how can we do it better, bolder, and clearly faster. KOPE is the only purpose-built software platform for offsite construction. It enables the transition from traditional construction by integrating offsite processes and products.
So I'm here today to talk about KOPE, and what I want to do is maybe not spin this too much into a product demonstration. We're 2 years into our journey here, so we're relatively early in that process, and I can confidently say that it does not do what we wanted it to do just yet. We're still building. It's been a bit of a journey, but I wanted to maybe spin that conversation into maybe focusing on the theme of today, which is around innovation. And we've kind of been focused on that as a kind of a primary driver for this business. So what the hell is KOPE? So first of all, KOPE is an acronym for Kit of Products Engine, which we think is kind of a cool name. It's a relatively rare name, so you can Google us pretty quickly. You might find a Slovenian ski resort alongside us, but just us attached to that. And the reason that we exist is actually a relatively simple problem. So our background, as mentioned earlier on, is that we actually all of the founders of our business are ex-Grimshaw, which has its own problems, which we'll talk about another time. But what's been interesting for us is that our journey went from architecture and design directly into kind of a DFMA world, where we wanted to be able to solve a lot of the problems around bringing offsite processes into design. So one of the things that's really obvious to a lot of us is that if you want to be bringing in prefabrication into your design world, it's actually really, really difficult to do unless you do it really, really early. You need to make a lot of those decisions up front, and it tends to be a bit of an afterthought. And so we were like, well, okay, well, how the hell are we going to solve that? We are going to solve that with the most complicated bit of code I've ever seen. We've been writing quite a phenomenally complex tool. But what we wanted to do is to build a software platform that had an incredibly simple mechanism for the design world and general contractors to be able to engage in off-site construction really easily. So where that all comes from is that our background is typically consulting into construction space, but we did actually quite a lot of work in the volumetric modular space in the UK. That's not gone that well as an industry. There's been a lot of issues in relation to having volumetric modular in the home building space in the UK. It actually tends to work typically a lot better when you're talking about the medium and high-rise space, but not necessarily in relation to homes. And what we wanted to do is to move and support the design world moving into a productized kind of, workflow. So where that lended us to be is that, well, jokes aside, obviously the original name of the business was based around a kit of parts engine. And we realized that actually that's something that we're kind of pushing back against, the idea that you can have a kit of parts. And the reason for that is probably a little bit intangible. It's based around the idea that a lot of companies have actually started to design their own and starting to build walls around themselves. So what we wanted to be able to do is to build a technical platform that would allow people to move information between different kits. But the way that you actually think about that is that it's more so of a product-based approach. So different people building different products, being able to bring them into one space. So one of the things that we learned at the very, very start of this journey was that we were working with a volumetric modular company in the UK, and that is the model that they gave us when we started that journey. And what we realized is that this is a company who are building volumetric modular homes, but actually they don't design the modules that they make. They were designing the homes that would end up being on site. They really didn't have a connection to the thing that they actually sell. And what they were selling was modules. So we really went through a process with them that said, look, you are not actually making this thing that you've designed. You have a 3D model, you have lots of drawings, lots of schedules, reports of a thing that you're actually not making. So why are we going through that process? So what we decided to do is to actually move them into a world where they were starting to think about the products that were brought together to actually make those modules. So that's an example of that very, very first tool that we built about 4 or 5 years ago. And the idea behind this was to say, you keep designing that house, and what we'll do is we'll build automation that basically breaks it into all the products. So everything you see in there is basically all of the different componentry that would be within one of those modules. So where that's kind of moved us into is that the idea that we're very much focused around how can we get offsite construction in really, really quickly? How can we get that into the design workflow really, really fast? And to be able to do it, you need to build a lot of infrastructure, and you need to build a lot of technology. It's not necessarily a simple thing to do. And the basic understanding of the way that we've approached this is kind of 2 different areas. So the first one is the idea that you have digital products, and I think a lot of us will probably be familiar with that. We live in a world where Revit, these different design tools make lots of content, and we have lots of frustrations about that. We'll talk about that another time. But what we've tried to do is actually start to move away from the idea of lots of content sat on different websites and different places, and focus around the things that drive those products. So as you can see here, we're talking about the capabilities of our products and the rules of its manufacturing. What can that product actually do? So as an example, a floor deck can only be of a certain span, it can only be of a certain weight, its materiality is very well known, it's manufactured in a factory, and we know its constraints. So we wanted to digitize that. The second aspect of this is around the projects. How do you digitize what you want to do within a project? So coming from an architectural background, we've spent a lot of time saying, well, we'd really like to have a kind of a general vibe around a building, but you can't really digitize a vibe. It's not really a thing you can do. We've tried. It doesn't work well. What you do tend to realize is that actually the vast, vast majority of the design world is based around very simple rules. So this is the width of a door, this is the width of a corridor, this is the relationship between this room and this room. All of these things are relatively rule-based. So what we wanted to do is to get those 2 different things and mash them together into one crazy, crazy platform that we're working on at the moment. So that's kind of the focus today. So I won't dwell on this diagram too much. This is actually from about 1.5 years ago, and this is kind of an initial method for a small startup like ourselves. And I would reiterate that we're the only ones really going through the keynotes today who are not making physical things. And it's allowed us to be quite fast in relation to making adjustments in the type of structure that we want to be within the business. And what we have here is, you can see on the end of this diagram, is that it's focused around the idea that you could procure. If you can procure very quickly from design, you start to compress that whole process down. But the reason I want to show this is that actually what it meant was that we needed to build 2 very, very distinct pieces of technology. The first one being around the early stage, which is getting all of those products into a marketplace. Very sensitive to the word marketplace because it implies commerciality, it implies financial processes. That's something that we're not necessarily engaging with, but I'll get into that in a few minutes. And the second side of that is KOPE Construct, and that's the kind of platform that we wanted to discuss today. So these are the 2 aspects of what we've had to build. We did not foresee this, so anyone who is in the startup space, anyone who's building technology in the room, you probably should get ready for some surprises. We really did think we were going to build a computational engine. We were going to build this cool design tool in the cloud. No, that we didn't. We ended up having to build 2 very distinct things that are interrelated and interoperate. It's been quite a complex challenge to solve. So let's dive into those 2 different things. So the first of which is that KOPE market space, and the second which is KOPE Construct. So this is just a kind of an overview of what those 2 things are. Now, one of our big dreams was to be able to basically say to a design team or to a contractor, we probably kind of know what you're going to have within your building. You have a supply chain that you've already engaged. You already kind of know how your building should perform. Let's get those products into a design. But the problem is how? How exactly do you do that? And so what we decided to do is to build a kind of a Trojan horse piece of technology around the marketplace, which would allow people to go in there, put in some very simple information, and in the back end of that build quite complex digital products. So we've gone through that space on the market. When it comes to construct, that's where you have your design space. So when to connect this into the design tools that are already out there, obviously skirting around the Autodesk world and having to touch some of their products, but making sure that people can put a project in there, run COPE, and then go back to the workflow that they're in. Now, the reason that this is important to us is because we really need to bring those two things together. This has been quite a challenge. One of the major drivers for us in the UK has been that we've realized that a lot of companies are very much focused on one of these two sides, but never the two. And what we wanted to be able to achieve is to bringing those products directly into a project with a lot of ease and a lot of taking away the complexity. Now, where we are as a company right now is that we've actually launched two of those markets, one in the UK and one in North America. And I'll show you that in a second, what exactly is on there, and then construct alongside that, which we have a completely separate team of very talented computational designers building that platform. So what exactly is the plan here with co-construct? So let's just break down in really simple terms for everybody. So first of all, what we tend to do is we focus around the idea that, as I said earlier, you need to make decisions early. If you want to be bringing in something that's precast, pre-manufactured, you have to do it relatively soon. And the only kind of digital asset that you tend to have in a project at that stage is relatively low detail. So what we've tried to do is let's leverage those low detail models. So we bring in those low detail models, and what we do is we use the inherent rules of what those products are and break them down. So as an example, this is not a single big floor. Well, maybe it is because it's a ground floor here, but if there's a basement, this is many, many different floor slabs. And what's interesting about that is, as an architect, I would have tended to draw one giant floor, and I would have said that's a precast floor with lots of decks, but I'm not going to tell you how exactly that works. It would have just been one big intent. And what we wanted this tool to do is to break all of those down into all the products that you would actually bring into a site. What is exciting about the back end of that is that you get to optimize. So one of the big drivers for us when we were working on the volumetric modular was, and it really feeds into what Matthew was talking about earlier on, was that idea of that kind of zero waste scenario in relation to materials. We actually gave them a scenario through our algorithms that got plasterboard waste to zero. We went through a process. We were able to move certain elements within the buildings and get it to zero. And the reaction from the client was incredibly negative. They really hated it. And the reality was that they wanted to get rid of labor waste. They did not have the drivers within the business to restructure their factory floor to remove that material waste. They just didn't want it. What they wanted was for to optimize for the way that people moved within the factory, moved materials around, and installed that material, which is a very, very different problem to solve. But there is a scenario here where enough information can actually get waste to quite a low percentage. And then, just pushing that then forward, we're very much focused on pushing you back into the world that you already exist in. So if your typical design tools, staying in your analysis tool, staying in your design tool, making a decision fast, iterate, and then move back. And then the least sexy part of this, which is like automating all of the outputs, which we have a very passionate team building that in London at the moment. And they get very upset when I don't spin it into a bit of a yarn on this presentation, but it is what it is. So what we've had to do in that process is to say, well, actually, if you're going to start to break a building down into all the things that it's made of, you have to understand the rules of all those things. It's actually relatively simple. I'm not going to have a piece of plasterboard that's 4 meters by 4 meters. That's just not going to be possible. There's a very basic inherent rule around all of those different products. So we just codify all of that. We go online, we use some website scraping data, we just pull all that information in, we understand the inherent rules of what these products are, and we just codify it within the system. So we're very much focused around what the minimum, maximum things are, how heavy they are, what the carbon impact is, the cost impact. So that's all built into the tool. So one of the things that we've had to do, and this is actually really important to us, and I think it's really lent into why we're here today, has been that I'm stood here talking about a piece of software that we're still working on, but the reality is that the amount of research we've had to do has been astronomical. Like, we've had to do quite a significant amount of work to understand the basics of how these different products work, and it's really lent us to have a deep respect for the manufacturers and the way that they actually put them together. we've spent the last 2 years going through a significant amount of different categories and how the industry actually makes products. And we've had to break that down into a way that a software developer might understand. You know, a software developer needs very, very simple, clear instructions for a lot of the decisions that they're going to have to implement. And we've had to really break that down. So interestingly, if you're not really excited about a bit of software, you could probably still have a chat with us about how a product should work. So feel free to do that. So I just wanted to quickly show you what market looks like at the moment. So, and the real driver for this, I hope that's going to play. There we go. The real driver for this, as I said, is incredibly selfish, and I'll be very honest about that. When we started this journey, we were like, okay, there's going to be a free-to-use, simple digital platform for you to be able to engage and bring your products to the market. But the reality is that we want to build a computational tool, an automation tool that needs those products. So if we don't have them, this all falls apart. So we've really driven a lot of effort into putting this together. So basically, this is a simple example of one of those tools that we're starting to spin up in different regions. We've been talking to a team in Singapore about having a regional hub there. We're spinning up the Irish version of this as we speak, which is going to be very small, as you can imagine. But it's really important for us to have all of that data in one space. And what's quite compelling to us is that if you want to do offsite or prefabrication, where your site is in relation to where your supply chain is incredibly important. It's not an accident. In relation to the choices that you make. You don't want to be shipping things particularly far. It really undoes a lot of the impacts that you're trying to achieve, the positive impacts. So we have all of that built into this system. So I won't get into the fine detail of that because I'm not trying to sell you a license to a marketplace, even though there is no license to this. What I want to do is just explain what we're trying to achieve. Now, this piece here is KOPE Construct, and what's important to note, I think, is that there's a lot of people in this room who are very much focused around the innovation that happens in the construction industry. And we decided to tackle a problem that was relatively significant. If this actually gets to a point in the next couple of years where we have critical mass of products, we do feel that you're going to start to be able to integrate a lot of these companies directly into your projects really quickly. But the problem with that is that it really does involve quite a few different stakeholders. So let's run through this and I'll show you what I mean by that. So hopefully that plays, there we go. So again, we're basically building something that's a little bit agnostic. So we don't use any technology from any other software vendor. We don't use anything from Autodesk or any of their competitors. This is completely removed from them. And what we want to be able to achieve is a very simple concept of having a low-level design, very simple project that we just want to be testing ideas in. We haven't gone through a process and actually procured services yet. We don't necessarily have planning permission yet. We're relatively early on. And what you're going to see here is on the left side, we're just going to choose from our supply chain, all of the approved suppliers in that region. What products do they have? So in this example, I think we're going to be doing a light gauge steel frame internal partition system. And what KOPE has just done there, and this video is very, very fast, it's basically placed every single element in that model instantly. So it's taken about 5 or 10 seconds to run that. And that would normally be something that you simply wouldn't model ever because you couldn't model that ever. And what we want to get across here is that you can still have your design and you can go through your process, but you can also have a parallel model that's ultra detailed, has all of the information available to you. So what's happening on the screen here at the moment is that we're actually saying, I don't really love the solution I got there. Let's run it again. So let's change that paneling system. Let's change the rules of that system being placed. And it's placed all of the content again individually straight into that model. So what's interesting to us about that, and we've been working with a large contractor on this, they go through a process of consuming a design file, and they are tendering for the job. And typically what they would do is they would pour a hell of a lot of concrete into that project. And what they're trying to do is they're saying, you know what, we actually build a lot of precast concrete panels and systems in our factories. We'd love to see if we can get them into a project quickly. So what they do is they basically digitize all of those products with us. All of the rules inherent in them are built in, and they're able to get a price of that instantly. So they're able to bring that model in, run that concrete system, and you're going to see the end of this video is actually that particular system being placed. All of the rules are just given to us by the manufacturer, so you understand exactly how it works, what the maximum size is, how it operates on a truck, how it moves on site, how it operates around facades and cores. All of the information is embedded in. So it's quite important to us to be able to connect all of that directly into the design. This is the optimization piece. As I said earlier on, not everyone optimizes for the same thing. And we want to be able to give people the ability to say, I'm okay with a slightly higher cost because I want to have better sustainability goals. I want to be able to focus on things that are not necessarily purely commercial. And what KOPE is able to do here is say to you, well, okay, you can have a little bit of a drop in cost, but you're going to be pushing your carbon footprint down. You're also going to have a quicker build time. You're going to have less crane lifts. You're going to have less logistics on site. So all of that information is embedded in the product. Now, moving forward into this, one of the things that we've really realized is that, and especially coming from architecture, which for any architects in the room, this is going to really speak quite true. It's incredibly linear in a way that requires you to have to go back to the start very, very regularly. It's an incredibly frustrating process typically. So what we've found is that we go from this kind of information around the project design, what's the briefing, how are we going to do this project? We send that out to some consultants, they push each other around for a few months, they probably land on a design that they're kind of okay with, but they haven't really explored every option. It's kind of gone down a few rabbit holes and that's where they've landed. They give it to a production team, which is typically in the same room as them, paid a lot less, I might add, as I was one of them. And that production team creates all the content. When that content is done, it goes through the contractor process and it's sent out to the supply chain for them to provide the materials to the building. And then at the end of that, then after the manufacturing, it all comes back on site and it's assembled. That's like very, very hopeful if that actually happens in a straight line. It probably never has. And what we want to be able to do is to move away from that. So our focal point is to be able to say that everyone after that briefing is able to move information around in a single space. So if you're a manufacturer of a product, you're able to actually influence that design and say, this is what I can provide for you. It isn't just a PDF brochure. It's not some simple Revit family. It's actually saying, I can get this into your project with this cost, this carbon impact immediately, and I can prove it to you. With all of the automation of that, giving you all of the production information automatically at the back of that. So kind of getting into the kind of endpoint of this, where we really focus on is three simple tenets of this. So the first one being manufacturers. I want to sell more stuff. Really simple. I want to get more of my things into more of your projects. Really simple metric. The issue is that the designers tend to not really know how those products work. And they probably don't need to. There's a lot of information in, the way that concrete actually works as a material. That, your architects or engineers are only going to be skimming over the top level information of that to be able to influence their project. We want to be able to digitize all of that for them. On the design side, as I said earlier on, if you don't make these decisions early, you'll never make them. If you go through all of your design process and you get near the point where you're actually costing a project and you swap out a structural system, it's going to have a pretty significant impact on your design. So you tend not to do that. And then the last aspect of this is around the contractor. And it's, if there's any contractors in the room, I apologize for this. But the obsession with money in the contractor space has actually lent us some abilities within this tool to actually help us evolve it. The focus on cost that really isn't there at any other stage of the project has actually been quite helpful. The idea that you can do a tender return in a few seconds is incredibly compelling to a lot of contractors because a lot of time is spent on that. But also, to be able to hide costs within certain aspects of this is something that we do need to remove. We need to be able to have a little bit more visibility around cost. So that's where the contractors push back a little bit, but I think everyone else in that supply chain really engages in that. So thanks for that, very whirlwind. So that's basically where we are as a team, and thank you for having me over. Cheers.
You get to sit down. Thank you. And we've probably got time for just one question, and I get to ask it. So, Jamie, I was struck when I was looking at one of the timelines that you presented around 2019, Platform 3.0, and there was a reference to the Forge, that Landsec development that when I looked on the website, it's just a few minutes from the river in London. What is it possible for us to see multiple forges, if you like, and what would it take to be able to do that? Is there changes in something that would need to do that?
Because of the physicality of buildings, there's inevitably like a lag between, we wrote the first book in 2017, it's taken till now to actually have the physical example, and then people go, oh, you might have been right. Yeah, okay, maybe we should have a go at that. So that time lag has been quite frustrating, but it is literally like people wouldn't quite believe we were onto something until they'd seen a physical one And now the planning starts to do the next one. So there is the hopeful bit is that we've been working on the new hospitals programme in the UK. So actually the number of government people that visited the Forge was astonishing, actually. The level of interest from government to see it as a kind of physical thing. So there's one potential ray of light where a lot of the thinking from the Forge went straight into the hospitals programme. So if they can deploy that at scale, that will be life-changing. But the real reason I think Landsec had to change their internal procurement and a whole load of their internal systems to buy that building, and they could because they're Landsec and they're a private developer. Government doesn't know how to procure this stuff yet. So central government said, yes, we should definitely do this, but there's a whole load of things around their existing frameworks aren't designed to procure anything other than two-stage D&B. You know, the IP issue needs sorting out, the warranties. There's a whole load of sort of ecosystem things now that need to be done. So technically everyone can sort of see that it's definitely achievable and it could be done. But yeah, the time it's now going to take for everything else to catch up around it and to turn it into a kind of procurable thing, that's my kind of frustration and the sort of patience thing. Well, obviously part of the opportunity is for other nations to go, right, let's not then also spend another decade waiting for us to do it. So part of the reason we're here, and we've got people in Melbourne and Sydney, and we're travelling around the world, is trying to propagate this thinking and saying everyone should have access to this stuff. We don't patent anything, we open source things, but the opportunity is for everyone else to now move at the same pace and accelerate things. If we do, there's a chance we'll save the planet.
That's a fairly compelling answer. David, is there anything around that is important for you and the way that you're working?
Yeah, absolutely. Funnily enough, we sent a lot of our team multiple times to the Forge to visit it for the inspiration of actually seeing how you could do this. I think from our point of view, building technology really needs people who are building physical things to like knock walls over. They need to be the vanguard of that. And I don't believe that we will be successful as a business and also as a platform if it isn't for the likes of Jamie and his team basically going out and saying, you have to do this. Here's the reasons why, but also here's how you do it. And that answer is the thing I think is going to get us where we need to be.
Yeah. And just before we finish, I was really struck, David, by one of your comments about solving the wrong problem for the customer. The one who you proudly solved the plasterboard waste to zero, and they went, well, we care about labour waste. Are there other examples where you've thought, I know exactly what the customer wants, what's good for them, and I'm going to go after that, and then when you've got to the customer, they've shown a high level of indifference?
Every day.
Oh, there you are. What do you learn from that?
Quite a bit. You know what the actual answer is, that I believe that we learned a very, very valuable lesson that maybe wasn't the lesson that they intended to teach us, which is people who build technology really should talk to their customers first. And don't build technology before you speak to some people about it. We built an algorithm that would save significant waste, and the reaction devastated us. And we're like, oh, that's a bit wasteful, isn't it, in itself? So we really should be speaking to these people first. And I think, the fact that myself and Jamie have discussed this at length is exactly a learning process for us on top of that.
Okay. And Jamie, you get to have the last word. What did you learn about this that you didn't expect you would learn, or just as you've gone through your process of, writing those books, working through all of this, was there something where you went, well, I wasn't expecting that?
I think one of the most interesting things actually was the reaction of the lower tiers. So because we went straight to the supply chain for the facade and the MEP and things, it was like they've been waiting for someone to ask this question like for ages. They're going, oh, finally someone, because normally the way we procure things, by the time the package of information arrives at them, they're going, if you'd asked me this 2 years ago, I'd have told you not to do that. I wouldn't have done that. I'd reorganise that. But it's too late by the time they get hold of it. So the opportunity to go and straight to them, share with them what we were doing, and them going, no, we've got some thoughts around this actually. So that again is I think, interesting thing. The business model of the GCs isn't set up to do this. The lower tiers are definitely there. I think there's some really interesting opportunities, but the business model that sits in the middle, which is normally the gatekeeper. So Landsec, we're going talking directly to supply chain. That's really weird for Landsec, because the normal gatekeeper is the tier one who then manages that. That is a potential blocker, because there's quite a lot to do in terms of what is the new value proposition for GCs and tier ones. That, I think, is a big conversation that we need to have.
Fantastic. And thank you. I mean, I think we should all put our hands together for a big thank you.